I call Todd Barclay.
Chair, it's a privilege to be able to speak in support of the electronic monitoring of offenders legislation bill. We've already heard this evening about which categories of people this bill is being extended to cater for. I just want to pick up on a couple of points that two previous members have mentioned. First, at any one time, around 47 people who are out on electronic monitoring being able to cut off their bracelet. That's in the context of 4,000 people at any one time wearing one of these monitored pieces of equipment at any time, Mr Speaker. And actually it's also in the context of, since 2012, we've had this piece of legislation which Mr Goff introduced in place, protecting some of our most dangerous criminals who are out in the public. But since before then, there were literally thousands of people who should have been monitored who weren't monitored because the technology simply wasn't there, who were out in the community, Mr Speaker. And now what we're doing is extending that category down to lower level offenders. And I think a perfect case in point, which was experienced last week through the media in Hutt South, about a sexual predator who is under electronic monitoring in Hutt, potentially at risk to his community. That was part of a wider package of safety reforms that were in place to protect the community from that person. Electronic monitoring was in place for him, but there were also two other corrections officers who were monitoring his appearance at 24/7 throughout the day, Mr Speaker. And I think the thing that this piece of legislation does is it extends to a wider category of people who are out in the community. These people who are not going to live in prison for their entire lives, they're serving sentences of 2 years or less. They are simply not going to be in prison for the rest of their lives. They are going to be in a community, they're going to be somebody's neighbour, and they're going to be near areas where they could be of risk to the public. Electronic monitoring in this sense extends public safety, and it keeps pace with the technology as it's developed. In 2012, when the Department of Corrections first implemented it, it was because the technology had developed to the point where they could reasonably implement it to the public, and they could have a level of safety ensuring that there were safeguards in place there. This is a good piece of legislation. In the context of what Labor is trying to spin tonight around having people out there who can cut off their bracelets, well, yes, that's probably right. Unless they're going to be made out of titanium, you're probably going to be able to cut them off. But you know as well as I do, Mr Goff, when you were watching the news, that human being who chopped off that electronic monitor, that electronic bracelet, was no average-sized human being. He was a very big, strong person who would obviously reasonably be able to cut the bracelet off. The fact is that's 1% of people, and this is a good piece of legislation, and that's why we're supporting it, Mr Speaker.
I'm calling